Story 1. The Mirror That Showed Tomorrow. Jake Morrison had been hauling freight across the Midwest for 11 years when he stopped at a truck stop outside Des Moines, Iowa, on a humid August night in 2017. The 34-year-old driver from Wisconsin was known for his meticulous maintenance routine, always keeping his Peterbilt in pristine condition. That night, while adjusting his mirrors in the parking lot, Jake noticed something impossible reflected in his driver's side mirror, a version of himself that didn't match his current actions. Jake was standing still beside his truck, but the reflection showed him climbing into the cab. He blinked hard and looked again. Now the reflection matched reality. Must be exhaustion playing tricks, he thought. He'd been driving for 9 hours straight, pushing to make his delivery deadline. Jake climbed into his cab and settled in for a few hours of rest before continuing to Kansas City. He woke 3 hours later and checked his mirrors before pulling out. That's when he saw it clearly. In his driver's side mirror, the reflection showed his truck engulfed in flames, thick black smoke pouring from the engine compartment, and Jake himself standing beside the burning vehicle, his clothes scorched, his face twisted in agony and terror. But when Jake looked directly at his truck, everything was normal. Clean, intact. No fire, no smoke. Only the mirror showed the burning truck. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. He stepped out and examined the mirror itself, thinking maybe it was damaged or distorted. The glass was perfect, clean, no cracks or warping. He looked at his truck again, totally fine, looked back at the mirror, engulfed in flames. Over the next hour, Jake tested the mirror obsessively. Every time he looked at it, it showed his truck on fire, showed him standing beside it in obvious distress. But reality remained stubbornly normal. His truck ran fine. No mechanical issues, no smell of smoke, nothing wrong. Jake considered reporting this to someone but couldn't imagine explaining it without sounding insane. Instead, he covered the driver's side mirror with duct tape and drove using only his passenger mirror and rear cameras. He made it to Kansas City without incident, dropped his load, and picked up a return shipment headed back to Wisconsin. The covered mirror bothered him constantly. He could feel it there, could imagine what it might be showing him at any given moment. Finally, unable to resist, Jake pulled over at a rest area somewhere in Iowa, not far from where this had started, and peeled back the duct tape. The mirror showed his truck on fire, exactly as before. But now there was something else. A date and time, visible on a digital clock in the reflection. August 23rd, 3:47 p.m. Jake checked his phone. Today was August 21st, and it was currently 11:30 a.m. The mirror was showing him something that would happen 2 days in the future. A chill ran through Jake. Was this a warning? A premonition? Could he prevent whatever the mirror was showing him? He took photos of the reflection, documenting the burning truck, the timestamp, everything. Then he drove straight to a truck repair shop and demanded a complete inspection, telling the mechanics he'd been smelling something electrical and wanted everything checked. The mechanics found nothing wrong. No electrical issues, no fuel leaks, no mechanical problems that could cause a fire. Jake's truck was in excellent condition, but Jake wasn't satisfied. He had the mechanics check again, insisted they examine the wiring harness, the battery connections, the exhaust system. Still nothing. The head mechanic finally told Jake his truck was safer than most new vehicles on the lot and sent him on his way. Jake drove carefully for the next 2 days, hyper-aware of every sound, every smell, constantly checking his gauges and instruments. He avoided highways when possible, stayed in the slow lane, kept a fire extinguisher within arm's reach. August 23rd arrived and Jake watched the clock obsessively. 3:00 p.m., 3:30 p.m., 3:45 p.m. At exactly 3:47 p.m., Jake was stopped at a red light in Madison, Wisconsin, just 20 miles from home. He was congratulating himself on beating whatever fate the mirror had shown him when a pickup truck ran the red light from the cross street. T-boned a sedan in the intersection and sent it spinning directly into Jake's truck. The impact ruptured Jake's fuel tank, and the sedan's destroyed engine, spewing sparks and dripping hot oil, ignited the diesel. Jake had seconds to react. He threw open his door and jumped from the cab as flames raced up the side of his truck. He hit the pavement hard, rolled away, and looked back to see his Peterbilt fully engulfed in fire, exactly as the mirror had shown him. The timestamp on a nearby bank sign read 3:47 p.m. Emergency services arrived quickly. No one was killed, though several people, including Jake, suffered minor injuries. The pickup driver was arrested for DUI. Jake's truck was a total loss, burned to its frame. And as Jake sat on the curb being treated by paramedics, he remembered the mirror. In all the chaos, he'd forgotten about it. He walked over to his burned truck, now cooled enough to approach. The driver's side mirror had been shattered by the impact, but fragments remained. Jake carefully picked up the largest piece of reflective glass, about the size of his palm, and looked into it. The reflection showed him standing beside a different truck, a newer model, red instead of blue, looking into the mirror with a confused expression. Behind the reflected Jake, emergency lights flashed, and what looked like a severe accident scene was visible. Another date was visible on a reflected clock, November 14th, 4:22 p.m., 3 months in the future. A different truck, but another disaster. Jake dropped the mirror fragment and backed away. Whatever curse or phenomenon had infected his mirror, it hadn't been destroyed by the fire. It had transferred to the fragment, or maybe it was attached to Jake himself, using whatever reflective surface was available to show him his future disasters. Jake never drove professionally again. He sold his damaged truck to a salvage yard and took a job in a warehouse, working in logistics but keeping his feet on solid ground. He avoided mirrors when possible, covered the ones in his home, and learned to navigate his life using as little reflection as possible. But the visions didn't stop. Every few months, Jake would catch a glimpse of himself in a car window, a storefront, a puddle of water, and see not his current reflection but a future one, always showing him in some crisis, some disaster, some moment of terror and pain. The dates were always visible, giving him days or weeks to dread what was coming. Sometimes Jake tried to prevent the disasters the reflections showed. He'd avoid the locations, change his plans, take precautions. But reality always found a way to align itself with the visions. If the reflection showed him falling downstairs on a specific date, he'd stay in a single-story building all day, only to trip over equipment and fall in a loading dock, hitting his head exactly as the reflection had depicted. Jake came to understand that the mirror hadn't been showing him the future to warn him. It had been showing him the future because that future was fixed, immutable, destined to happen regardless of his knowledge or actions. The mirror was a curse disguised as a gift, giving him the agony of foreknowledge without the power of prevention. 5 years after the first vision, Jake still sees his disasters coming. He's learned to live with it, accepted that his life will be a series of accidents and injuries that he can see approaching but never avoid. The mirror that showed tomorrow wasn't offering him a chance to change his fate. It was forcing him to watch his fate unfold in advance, over and over, a never-ending preview of pain with no option to look away. And somewhere in the quantum mechanics of reflected light and curved glass, the curse continues, showing Jake Morrison every future disaster while guaranteeing he'll be powerless to stop any of them. Trapped in a life where tomorrow's horrors are always visible in today's reflections. Story 2. The Rest Stop That Moves. Carmen Rodriguez had driven the I-95 corridor between Miami and New York for 8 years, making the route so frequently she knew every rest stop, every exit, every landmark along the way. The 42-year-old driver from Puerto Rico prided herself on her navigational knowledge and never needed GPS for this familiar run. That's why, On a foggy March night in 2019, Carmen was so disturbed when she pulled into a rest stop that shouldn't have existed. She'd been driving for 6 hours and needed a bathroom break. According to her mental map, she was somewhere in South Carolina, about 20 miles south of the usual rest area she frequented. But a large green sign appeared in her headlights. Rest area, 1 mile. Carmen didn't remember this sign from previous trips, but 8 years of routes meant details could blur together. Maybe this was a newer facility. The rest stop was small but well-maintained. Clean restrooms, vending machines, a few picnic tables under lights, and space for maybe 15 vehicles. Carmen was the only person there. Unusual for I-95, but not impossible at 2 a.m. She used the facilities, grabbed a coffee from a vending machine, and returned to her truck within 20 minutes. Carmen continued north and within 40 miles encountered the rest area she'd been expecting. The familiar one she always used, with its distinctive welcome center and large parking area. She'd stopped at 2 rest areas in South Carolina, but her mental map insisted there should only be one. Strange, but not alarming. Maybe they'd opened a new facility in the past few months. 2 weeks later, Carmen was making the same run southbound this time. She watched for the first rest stop, the one she'd discovered, curious to confirm its location. But when she reached the area where it should have been, there was nothing. No exit, no sign, no rest area. Just empty highway. Carmen checked her GPS history, but it showed no record of her stopping anywhere except the familiar rest area. Confused but busy, Carmen dismissed it as a mistake in her memory. 3 weeks passed before her next northbound run. At roughly the same location, though she couldn't be certain, the rest stop appeared again. Same configuration, same small size, same eerie emptiness. Carmen pulled in, determined to document this place. She took photos of the facilities, the signs, the mile markers visible from the lot. An older man was sitting at one of the picnic tables, the first other person Carmen had seen at this rest stop. He looked tired, worn, his clothes suggesting he'd been traveling for days. Carmen approached him. "Excuse me, do you know how long this rest stop has been here?" she asked. The man looked up with hollow eyes. "How long?" "I don't know. Feels like it's been here forever. Feels like I've been here forever." "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The man laughed bitterly. "Help? Sure. Help me figure out how to leave. I pulled in here 3 days ago. Every time I drive away, I end up back here within an hour. Different direction, different highway, doesn't matter. The rest stop finds me, brings me back." Carmen's skin prickled. "That's not possible. Isn't it? Try it yourself. Leave, drive anywhere, and see if you can actually get away. This place, it's not like other rest stops. It moves, shifts, appears where it wants to be. And once it decides it wants you, you're trapped." Carmen backed away from the man, unnerved by his intensity. She climbed into her truck and pulled out quickly, checking her mirrors as the rest stop receded. The man sat at the picnic table, watching her leave with an expression of resignation, as if he knew she'd be back. Carmen drove for 2 hours, making excellent time, putting over 100 miles between herself and that rest stop. She crossed into North Carolina, feeling foolish for letting a clearly disturbed man spook her. Then she saw the sign. Rest area 1 mile. No, it couldn't be the same one. There were lots of rest areas, but when Carmen reluctantly pulled in, her bladder demanding a stop, it was identical. Same layout, same picnic tables, same vending machines, and the same man still sitting there looking unsurprised to see her. "Told you," he said simply. Carmen's hands shook. "This is impossible. I drove 2 hours, I crossed state lines. The rest stop doesn't care about state lines. It exists outside normal geography. It's a trap, a pocket of space that anchors to certain drivers and won't let go. I've tried everything. Different routes, different directions, backtracking, taking secondary roads. Always end up here within an hour or two. "How long have you really been here?" Carmen demanded. The man checked his watch, then laughed. "According to this, 3 days. But I don't think time works right here either. Feels longer. Feels like weeks, maybe months. My phone stopped charging, my food ran out, but I'm not hungry, not thirsty, not tired, just stuck." Carmen refused to accept this. She got back in her truck and drove south this time, back toward Miami, determined to break whatever pattern was occurring. She drove for 4 hours straight, watching the sunrise, passing landmarks she recognized from hundreds of previous trips. Everything seemed normal. She was approaching the Florida border, definitely hundreds of miles from where that rest stop should be. The sign appeared, "Rest Area, 1 mile." Carmen screamed in frustration but pulled in anyway, needing to confront this impossibility. The rest stop was there, identical, unchanging. 3 trucks were now parked in the lot. She recognized one of them as belonging to the older man. The other 2 were unfamiliar. More drivers, Carmen realized. More people trapped by this mobile rest area. A woman in her 30s sat on the curb, her head in her hands. Carmen approached cautiously. "How long have you been here?" "I don't know anymore," the woman replied without looking up. "Days? Weeks?" "I stopped trying to leave. Every time you drive away, it feels like freedom, like you've escaped. Then the sign appears again and you're back. Eventually you realize there's no point in leaving. This is home now. This is forever." Carmen spent the next 6 hours attempting to break free. She tried driving at different speeds, taking different routes, even attempting to drive past the rest stop without stopping when the sign appeared. But some compulsion, some force she couldn't resist made her take the exit every time. And every attempt to leave led her back within an hour or two, regardless of distance or direction traveled. As the sun set on what Carmen thought was the same day, though she was losing certainty, 4 drivers now occupied the rest stop. They'd started talking, sharing their theories. One thought it was a quantum anomaly, a space that existed in multiple locations simultaneously. Another believed it was supernatural, a cursed location that had achieved some form of sentience. The oldest driver, a man who claimed to have been there for what felt like months, thought they were dead, that they'd all died in crashes or heart attacks, and this rest stop was their purgatory. Carmen refused all these explanations. There had to be a logical solution, a pattern she wasn't seeing. She examined every inch of the rest stop, looking for clues, for anything that might explain its impossible nature. In the women's restroom, she found graffiti scratched into a stall door. "The rest stop feeds on movement. It traps travelers because that's what it is. A parasite on the concept of travel. Stop trying to leave. Start trying to stay." The message was dated 15 years earlier. 15 years. How many drivers had been trapped here? How many had eventually escaped or died or simply faded away? Carmen looked at her fellow prisoners and wondered how long before she looked like them. Hollow-eyed, resigned, losing track of time and identity. That night, Carmen made a decision. If the rest stop fed on movement, on the desire to travel and leave, then maybe the solution was to refuse. To commit completely to staying, to abandon the concept of departure. She announced to the other drivers that she was done trying to leave. She would live here now, permanently, accepting this as her final destination. The other drivers thought she'd lost her mind, but Carmen was operating on a desperate theory. She spent the next subjective day organizing her truck as if she'd never drive it again. She moved supplies into the rest stop building, set up a sleeping area in one of the utility rooms, established a routine that assumed permanence. On the second day of her commitment to staying, something changed. The rest stop felt different, less solid, less permanent. The edges of the building seemed to shimmer occasionally, and the parking lot looked faded, as if it was losing definition. On the third day, Carmen woke to find herself alone. The other drivers and their trucks were gone. The rest stop itself looked older, more decrepit, with weeds pushing through pavement cracks and graffiti covering the walls. It looked abandoned, as if no one had maintained it for years. Carmen climbed into her truck and started the engine. She pulled out of the lot slowly, almost afraid to hope. She drove for 10 minutes, 20, an hour. No sign appeared, no compulsion to stop. She continued, south, watching her GPS confirm she was making normal progress along I-95, passing mile markers in the correct sequence. She was free. By committing to staying, by refusing to struggle against the trap, she'd somehow broken its hold on her. Carmen completed her delivery to Miami and immediately drove back north, determined to find the rest stop again to rescue the other drivers. But she never found it. She drove I-95 hundreds of times over the next 3 years looking for that specific configuration of facilities, that sign announcing a rest area that shouldn't exist. It never appeared. Sometimes Carmen wonders if she really escaped or if she's still there, living in a delusion of freedom while her body sits motionless in a truck at an impossible rest stop. Other times she wonders about the other drivers, whether they're still trapped, whether they eventually learned the same lesson she did, whether any of them had the strength to stop running and commit to staying. The rest stop that moves is still out there, Carmen knows, appearing on different highways in different states, always looking the same, always empty and waiting. Waiting for drivers who need to stop, who take the exit, who become anchored to its impossible geography. And those drivers will try to leave, will struggle and fight and refuse to believe they're trapped. Until eventually, if they're lucky, they'll learn what Carmen learned. Sometimes the only way to leave is to stop trying to leave. Sometimes freedom requires surrender. And sometimes the destinations we're running from are the only way to reach the destinations we're running toward. Story 3. The voice on Channel 19. Marcus Webb had been a long-haul trucker for 15 years, and his CB radio was his constant companion. The 41-year-old driver from Tennessee loved the community of the road, the chatter and banter that made lonely nights less isolating. Channel 19 was his home frequency where truckers shared information about traffic, weather, and speed traps. Marcus knew dozens of regular drivers by their CB handles, had formed friendships that existed only through radio waves. On a cold November night in 2018, Marcus heard a new voice on Channel 19, and within hours he wished he'd never responded. Marcus was hauling furniture from North Carolina to Texas, somewhere in Arkansas around midnight, when the transmission came through. Breaker 19, this is Lost Highway, looking for anyone heading west on I-40. Could use some company on these empty roads. The voice was unusual, soft, almost musical, with an accent Marcus couldn't place. He keyed his mic. This is Nashville, Marcus. I'm westbound on I-40. What's your 20? Appreciate it, Nashville. I'm about 40 miles east of Little Rock, somewhere around mile marker 135. Driving a black Freightliner, empty trailer. Been on the road for so long I'm forgetting what my own voice sounds like. Good to hear another driver. Marcus checked his position. He was near mile marker 95, about 40 miles behind Lost Highway. I'll catch up to you in about 30 minutes if you want to convoy up for a while. I'd like that, Nashville. I'd like that very much. Over the next 30 minutes, Marcus and Lost Highway chatted casually about routes, weather, the usual trucker talk. Lost Highway was funny, knowledgeable about the road, and had a way of telling stories that made the miles pass quickly. Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation. But when Marcus reached mile marker 135, there was no black Freightliner. The highway was empty in both directions, no vehicles visible. Marcus grabbed his CB. "Lost highway, this is Nashville. I'm at mile marker 135, but I don't see you. Did you pull off somewhere?" Static answered him for a moment, then Lost Highway's voice returned. "Still here, Nashville, still driving. Strange you can't see me. Maybe I'm further ahead than I thought. What's your mile marker now?" "Just passing 137, Marcus replied, confused. "I'm at 140. Speed up a bit, you'll catch me." Marcus accelerated, watching the mile markers tick by. 145, 150, 135. No black Freightliner, no truck at all. "Lost highway, I've driven 20 miles and still don't see you. Where are you?" "I'm right here, Nashville, always right here. Tell me, what year is it?" The question was so bizarre that Marcus laughed. "What year?" "It's 2018, November 2018. A long silence followed. Then Lost Highway spoke again, and the musical quality of the voice had shifted to something hollow. Sad. 2018, it's been 31 years then. 31 years since I crashed. Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. "What are you talking about?" "I'm John Remy. They used to call me Lost Highway because I loved the road so much, never wanted to go home. November 15th, 1987, I was hauling west on I-40 through Arkansas. Fell asleep at the wheel around mile marker 142. Truck went off the road, rolled 4 times, broke my neck, died instantly according to the report my wife read at my funeral." "This isn't funny," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "Not trying to be funny, Nashville, just trying to understand what happened to me. I woke up after the crash, climbed back into my truck and kept driving. But the sun never came up. Other trucks disappeared. I'd see them for a moment, then they'd fade away. I've been driving the same stretch of I-40 for 31 years, always at night, always alone. Until you answered me. You're the first person who's been able to hear me in decades." Marcus wanted to dismiss this as an elaborate prank, but the voice sounded too genuine, too sad. "If you're dead, how am I hearing you? How are you transmitting?" "I don't know. Maybe I'm not dead in the usual sense. Maybe I'm trapped somehow, caught between the moment of dying and whatever comes after. The road won't let me go, Nashville. I keep driving, keep calling out on Channel 19, keep hoping someone will answer. You're the first. Thank God you're the first." "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked. "I want you to prove I existed. My wife, Sarah Remy, she might still be alive. We lived in Memphis. I want you to find her, tell her I didn't abandon her. Tell her I've been trying to get home for 31 years, but I'm stuck on this road. Tell her I love her and I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise to quit trucking and settle down." Marcus pulled over at the next rest area, his mind reeling. He grabbed his phone and searched for John Remy Truck Accident, Arkansas, 1987. The results loaded. A news article from November 1987 describing a fatal accident on I-40, a trucker named John Remy who died when his vehicle left the road. The details matched exactly what Lost Highway had described. Marcus keyed his CB with shaking hands. "I found your accident report. John Remy, age 33, died November 15, 1987 at mile marker 142 on I-40 in Arkansas. That's you?" "That's me. Or that was me. I don't know what I am now." "I'll try to find your wife," Marcus promised. "I'll deliver your message. Thank you, Nashville, thank you, but be careful. The road took me. It might want you too. If you start hearing other voices, voices that don't belong to living drivers, don't answer them. The road is full of us, full of drivers who died and couldn't stop driving. We're all calling out, all trying to reach someone. But most of us are confused, angry, dangerous. I've held on to my sanity, but others haven't. They'll try to trick you, to lure you into joining them. Don't listen." As if summoned by John's warning, other voices began breaking through on Channel 19. Dozens of voices overlapping, all calling out, "Breaker 19, this is Shadow Rider. Anyone out there?" This is Phantom looking for convoy partners. Night driver seeking contact. Been alone so long, so long. The voices had a quality that made Marcus's skin crawl. Desperate, hollow, wrong. Turn off your CB, John urged. They've found you now. They know someone living is on this frequency. They'll keep calling, keep trying to reach you. Don't answer them, promise me. I promise, Marcus said and switched off his CB radio. The cab fell silent except for the hum of his engine. Marcus sat in the rest area for 20 minutes composing himself before continuing west with his CB remaining off. The next day, Marcus tracked down Sarah Remy. She was 79 years old, living in a Memphis nursing home. He visited her and delivered John's message. Sarah wept, said she'd never remarried, had spent 31 years wondering if John had really fallen asleep or if he'd simply chosen the road over her. Marcus assured her it was an accident, that John had been trying to get home all these years. Sarah died 3 weeks later peacefully in her sleep. Marcus attended her funeral and wondered if John knew, if somehow on that ghost highway where dead drivers endlessly travel, John Remy had felt his wife's death and finally been released from his decades-long journey. Marcus never heard Lost Highway on Channel 19 again, but he hears the others, the dozens of voices calling out from whatever frequency the dead use to communicate. They're there whenever he turns on his CB at night, overlapping transmissions from drivers who died on the road and never stopped driving. Shadow Rider, Phantom, Night Driver, and hundreds more, all trying to reach the living, all trapped on an endless highway in the darkness. Marcus keeps his CB off most nights now, but sometimes when loneliness gets too heavy, he turns it on briefly and listens to the voices of the dead calling out for connection, for someone to acknowledge their continued existence. He never answers them. He promised John he wouldn't. But he listens, bearing witness to the drivers who loved the road so much that not even death could make them stop, who continue their eternal routes on highways that exist between life and death, always calling out on Channel 19, forever seeking the company they had in life, forever trapped in the brotherhood of the road that extends beyond the grave. Story 4. The Way Station That Weighs Souls. Patricia Nguyen had been an owner-operator for 13 years, hauling whatever loads came her way across the western United States. The 37-year-old driver from California knew every way station on her regular routes, knew which ones were strict and which ones waved trucks through. On a bright afternoon in June 2020, Patricia approached a way station outside Winnemucca, Nevada, that she'd passed dozens of times before. But this time, the way station weighed more than just her truck. The open sign was lit, requiring all trucks to stop for inspection. Patricia pulled in, routine and unhurried. She'd been through this station many times. They'd check her weight, verify her permits, maybe inspect her logbook, and send her on her way. She drove onto the scale and waited for the light to turn green. The scale operator's voice came through the speaker. Gross weight shows 79,240 pounds, but there's another reading I'm getting. Step out of your vehicle and come into the office, please. Patricia frowned. She knew her truck shouldn't weigh that much. Her load of electronics should put her around 75,000 pounds. She climbed out and walked into the small office building. The scale operator was an older man, maybe 60, with weathered skin and eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her. There's a discrepancy, he said without preamble. Your truck weighs 75,180 pounds according to the standard scale, but the other scale shows additional weight, unregistered weight. I don't understand, Patricia said. What other scale? The operator pointed to a second digital readout Patricia had never noticed before, mounted below the main scale display. It showed a number, 4,060. This measures the other cargo, the operator explained. The cargo that isn't physical, guilt, regret, lies, broken promises, pain you've caused others. Everyone carries this weight. Most people carry it their whole lives without knowing. But at this weigh station, we measure it. We make it visible. Patricia laughed nervously. This is a joke, right? Some kind of weird psychological experiment? No joke. That number represents the accumulated spiritual weight you're carrying. 4,060 pounds of unresolved guilt and pain. That's actually relatively light. I've seen readings of 20,000 pounds, 50,000 pounds, people carrying so much damage that it's remarkable they can function at all. This is insane, Patricia said, backing toward the door. I'm leaving. You can leave, the operator said calmly. But the weight will still be there. And now that you know about it, you'll feel it. The invisible burden becomes visible. It doesn't get lighter. You just become more aware of how heavy you've always been. Patricia fled to her truck and drove away, her heart pounding. She told herself it was nonsense, some bizarre scam or delusion. But as she continued west toward Reno, she felt something she'd never noticed before, a heaviness that had nothing to do with her truck or cargo. A weight pressing down on her chest, her shoulders, her entire body. She thought about the things she'd done in her 37 years, the lying, the small cruelties, the relationships she'd damaged, her younger sister whom she'd betrayed 15 years ago by sleeping with her fiancé, her ex-husband whose business she'd helped destroy in their bitter divorce, her teenage son whom she'd abandoned for the road, choosing trucking over parenting because it was easier. 4,060 pounds of guilt. It sounded about right. Patricia tried to shake off the feeling, but it intensified. Every mile she drove, the weight felt more real, more crushing. By the time she reached Reno, she could barely breathe. She pulled into a truck stop and sat in her cab, gasping, feeling like her entire body was being compressed by an invisible force. She grabbed her phone and searched for information about the Winnemucca Way station. Nothing unusual came up. Just a standard commercial vehicle inspection facility, no mention of any special scales or spiritual measurements. She called the Nevada DOT to ask about it. They had no record of any secondary scales or unusual procedures at that location. Patricia drove back to Winnemucca the next day, determined to confront the operator and demand an explanation. But when she reached the weigh station, it was staffed by a young woman who'd never heard of any secondary scale. Patricia searched the office and found only the standard weight display, nothing else. The older man, the special scale, the reading of 4,060 pounds, none of it seemed to have existed. But Patricia could still feel the weight, crushing and constant. Over the following weeks, Patricia tried everything to lighten her burden. She called her sister and confessed, apologizing for the 15-year-old betrayal. Her sister hung up on her. She reached out to her ex-husband to make amends. He threatened to get a restraining order. She tried to reconnect with her son, who was now 23 and wanted nothing to do with her. Every attempt to address her guilt seemed to make the weight heavier, not lighter. Patricia realized that some damage couldn't be undone, some guilt couldn't be absolved. The 4,060 pounds would be with her forever. She started seeing other people's weights. Not literally, but she became hypersensitive to the emotional burdens others carried. The waitress, who moved slowly as if trudging through mud, Patricia could sense the woman's crushing depression. The truck driver, who couldn't make eye contact, Patricia recognized the weight of shame. Everyone around her was carrying invisible loads, staggering under spiritual burdens that no scale could measure except that impossible one at the weigh station. Patricia's health deteriorated. The constant feeling of compression led to real physical problems: high blood pressure, chronic pain, difficulty breathing. Doctors found nothing wrong with her, but Patricia knew the truth. The weight was killing her, slowly crushing her from the inside out. 6 months after her visit to the weigh station that measured souls, Patricia made a decision. She couldn't carry the weight anymore. She drove to a quiet stretch of highway in Nevada, not far from where this had started. and sat in her truck cab with the engine running. Carbon monoxide, she thought, would be gentle, a gradual fading rather than violent end. But as consciousness slipped away, Patricia had a vision. She saw the way station operator again standing beside her truck, looking sad. "The weight was always there," he said. "I just made you aware of it. Most people carry their burdens their whole lives without acknowledging them. You couldn't handle the awareness. But death doesn't remove the weight, Patricia, it just transfers it. Everyone you've hurt, everyone you've damaged, they'll carry your share now. Your 4,060 pounds will be distributed among them, adding to their own burdens." Patricia tried to speak, to argue, but the darkness was complete. She woke in a hospital, saved by a passing driver who'd noticed her truck idling and investigated. Patricia had been unconscious for nearly 30 minutes, but somehow survived without brain damage. The doctors called it miraculous. Patricia knew it wasn't a miracle. It was punishment. She tried to escape, the weight through death, and had been denied. She would have to carry her 4,060 pounds for as long as she lived, feeling every ounce of it, aware and suffering. She quit trucking after her release from the hospital. She couldn't drive anymore, couldn't focus with the crushing weight pressing down on her constantly. She took a job at a warehouse, something simple that didn't require much thought, and lived a quiet, isolated life. But Patricia never forgot the way station that weighs souls. She knows it's real, even though no one else believes her, even though it appears and disappears like a ghost checkpoint on Nevada highways. She knows that somewhere right now another driver is pulling onto that scale, is walking into that office, is learning for the first time the exact measure of their guilt and pain. And she knows they'll leave that station changed forever, burdened by awareness, crushed by the invisible weight they've been carrying all along. The way station that weighs souls doesn't appear on any maps, doesn't exist in any official records. But it's there, hiding among the ordinary checkpoints, measuring what standard scales can't detect. And every driver who stops there learns the same terrible lesson. Guilt has weight, pain has mass, and once you know how much you're carrying, you can never forget it again. The burden becomes real, physical, crushing, and there's no way to unload it, no way to lighten the load, no way to drive away from what you've carried all along. Story 5. The Cargo That Screamed. Leonard Hayes had been hauling freight for 19 years, specializing in sealed containers where he never saw or knew what he was transporting. The 48-year-old driver from Louisiana preferred it that way. Ignorance meant no liability, no questions, no complications. On a sweltering July night in 2016, Leonard picked up a sealed container from a warehouse in Houston, Texas, with delivery instructions for a facility in Shreveport. The pay was excellent, the route simple. Leonard didn't ask what was in the container, didn't care. That indifference would haunt him for the rest of his life. The first hour of the drive was normal. Leonard cruised north on I-45, his refrigerated trailer humming, maintaining the specified temperature of 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The container inside was sealed with heavy-duty locks and plastered with biohazard warnings. But Leonard had transported medical and chemical supplies before. Nothing unusual about that. Then somewhere past Huntsville, Leonard heard a sound from his trailer. A high-pitched keening like wind through a narrow gap. He turned down his radio to listen more carefully. The sound intensified. Not wind, but something else. Something that sounded disturbingly like a human voice screaming. Leonard pulled over onto the shoulder and climbed out, his heart racing. He walked to the back of his trailer and listened. The sound was definitely coming from inside. Multiple voices now, screaming in agony, crying for help. Leonard grabbed his phone to call 911 but hesitated. If this was some kind of human trafficking situation, opening the trailer could endanger whoever was inside. But if he called police and it turned out to be nothing, maybe some kind of pressure release or mechanical sound, he'd lose his contract and possibly his license. He called the number for the shipping company that had hired him. A bored receptionist answered. "I need to speak to someone about my current load," Leonard said urgently. "I'm hearing sounds from the container, sounds like people in distress." "Hold, please." Muzak played for 2 excruciating minutes. Then a different voice came on, male, cold, professional. "Driver Hayes, I'm told you're experiencing unusual sounds from your cargo. What exactly are you hearing?" "Screaming, multiple voices. It sounds like people are trapped inside that container and they're in pain. I can assure you, driver, there are no people in your cargo. What you're hearing is likely the contents settling or air pressure changes. The container is sealed for a reason. The contents are temperature sensitive and potentially hazardous. Under no circumstances should you open it or allow anyone else to open it. Continue to your destination as instructed." "But if someone is inside..." "No one is inside. The container was sealed at our facility under full supervision. It contains biological specimens, nothing more. The sounds you're hearing are not human. Continue your route, driver. Any deviation will result in breach of contract and legal action." The call ended. Leonard stood beside his trailer, listening to the screaming continue. It sounded human. It sounded like torture. But the company had been explicit, and Leonard had been in trucking long enough to know that curiosity and initiative rarely led anywhere good. He climbed back into his cab and continued north, turning his radio up loud to drown out the sounds from behind him. But the screaming penetrated anyway, high and desperate, seeming to come through the walls of his cab, through his skull, directly into his brain. Leonard drove faster, desperate to reach Shreveport and unload this nightmare cargo. The voices changed as the miles passed. Sometimes they screamed, sometimes they whispered in languages Leonard didn't recognize. Sometimes they called out names. "Sarah, where are you? Help us, please God, help us. Make it stop, make it stop, make it stop." Leonard's hands shook on the steering wheel. His mind conjured terrible images. Illegal medical experiments, black market organ harvesting, bioweapons testing. Whatever was in that container, it involved suffering on a scale Leonard couldn't comprehend. At a truck stop near Corsicana, Leonard made a decision. He would open the container, would document whatever was inside, and would call police regardless of the consequences. He couldn't deliver a cargo of suffering to its destination without at least knowing what he was enabling. He parked in a dark corner of the lot and approached the trailer with bolt cutters. The locks were heavy-duty, but Leonard was determined. It took him 20 minutes to cut through all the security measures. As he pulled open the container doors, the screaming reached a crescendo that nearly drove him to his knees. Inside was darkness, cold air rolling out in a wave. Leonard shined his flashlight into the container and saw nothing. Nothing but the walls of an empty, refrigerated space. No people, no specimens, no cargo of any kind. The container was completely empty, but the screaming continued, louder now that the doors were open, coming from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding Leonard in a vortex of sound. And he realized with horror that the voices weren't coming from inside the container. They were coming from the container itself, from the metal walls, as if the structure had absorbed screams and was now replaying them endlessly. Leonard slammed the doors shut, but it was too late. The screaming had escaped, had entered his mind through his ears, and now it wouldn't stop. Even after he locked the container, climbed back into his cab and drove away, the voices continued. They were inside his head now, permanent residents, screaming and pleading and suffering in an endless loop. Leonard delivered the container to the Shreveport facility as instructed. The receiving personnel unloaded it without comment, asked no questions about the broken locks. They'd been expecting the seals to be broken, Leonard realized. They'd known he would open it. That was part of the purpose. The screaming never stopped. For the next 6 years until his death in 2022, Leonard Hayes lived with constant auditory hallucinations. Voices screaming in his mind, 24 hours a day, no pause, no relief. Psychiatric medications didn't help. Therapy didn't help. Nothing helped. The voices had found a permanent home in his consciousness, and they would never leave. Leonard researched his cargo obsessively, trying to understand what he'd transported. He discovered references to experimental psychological weapons, containers designed to carry recorded trauma, concentrated suffering that could be transferred to anyone who opened them. The screams weren't from people inside the container. They were psychic recordings of suffering imprinted on the metal, waiting to be released into an unwary mind. He found evidence that similar containers had been transported across the country for decades, part of classified experiments in mimetic warfare and consciousness manipulation. The containers looked empty because they weren't carrying physical cargo, they were carrying concentrated trauma, weaponized suffering that could infect and destroy human minds. Leonard tried to warn other drivers, posting in forums and chat rooms about the dangers of sealed containers with biohazard warnings. Most dismissed him as crazy. A few recognized his story, admitted they'd heard similar sounds from their own sealed cargo but had been wise enough not to open the containers. They lived with milder versions of Leonard's curse, occasional whispers instead of constant screaming, manageable trauma instead of destroying madness. Leonard Hayes took his own life in April 2022, unable to bear the voices any longer. His suicide note apologized to everyone he'd ever known and ended with a warning. Some cargo should never be opened. Some screams should never be heard. The container was empty because the cargo wasn't meant to be carried by the trailer. It was meant to be carried by me. I was the delivery vehicle, and my mind was the destination. They used me to transport suffering from one place to another, to infect me with weaponized trauma. And now that suffering will die with me. Unless you've heard the screaming too. Unless you've opened a container you shouldn't have. Then you know what I know. Some cargo can't be unloaded and some deliveries never end. Story 6. The Hitchhiker with No Reflection. Raymond Costa had a strict policy about hitchhikers. He never picked them up. The 51-year-old trucker from Massachusetts had heard too many horror stories about drivers who'd stopped for someone on the roadside and lived to regret it. But on a rainy October night in 2019, somewhere on Route 15 through Pennsylvania, Raymond saw a young woman standing in the downpour and felt compelled to stop. Within minutes, he wished he'd trusted his instincts. She appeared in his headlights suddenly, standing on the shoulder with her thumb out, completely soaked. Raymond drove past, maintaining his rule, but something made him check his rearview mirror. The woman was still standing there, water streaming off her, making no effort to seek shelter. In weather this bad, hypothermia was a real danger. Against every principle he'd lived by, Raymond pulled over and backed up his truck. He rolled down his window. "You okay out there? You need help?" The woman approached, her face pale and drawn. She looked maybe 25, wearing a thin jacket inadequate for the weather. "I need a ride to Harrisburg. My car broke down 5 miles back. Phone's dead. I've been out here for 2 hours." Raymond hesitated. Every instinct said to drive away. But the woman looked genuinely desperate, and leaving her in this weather felt like sentencing her to death. "Get in. I'm heading through Harrisburg anyway." She climbed into the passenger seat, bringing with her the smell of rain and something else, something chemical like formaldehyde or embalming fluid. Raymond wrinkled his nose but said nothing. The woman sat rigidly, staring straight ahead, water dripping from her clothes onto his seat. "Thank you," she said, her voice flat. "I've been waiting for someone to stop." "What's your name?" Raymond asked, trying to make conversation. "Emma." They drove in silence for several minutes. Raymond kept glancing at his passenger, unnerved by her stillness. She sat without moving, without even seeming to breathe. And when Raymond looked in his rearview mirror, he saw something that made his blood freeze. He could see his own reflection clearly. He could see the passenger seat. But where Emma should have been, there was nothing. The seat appeared empty in the mirror, though Emma was visibly sitting there when Raymond looked directly at her. Raymond's hands tightened on the wheel. "Emma, can I ask you something? Why don't you have a reflection?" She turned her head slowly to look at him. "What do you mean?" "In the mirror. You're not in the mirror. I can see you sitting there, but you don't reflect." Emma looked at the rearview mirror, then back at Raymond. "Maybe your mirror is broken." "It's not broken. I can see everything else perfectly, just not you." They drove for another mile in tense silence. Then Emma spoke again, her voice still eerily flat. "I died on this road 7 years ago, October 23rd, 2012. My car slid on wet pavement and hit a tree. Died on impact. Since then, I've been standing on that shoulder every night it rains, waiting for someone to pick me up." Raymond wanted to pull over to force her out of his truck, but fear kept his foot on the accelerator. "That's not funny." "I'm not trying to be funny. I'm dead, Raymond. I don't reflect because reflections require light, and light requires life, and I don't have life anymore. I'm an echo, a memory, a ghost stuck in an eternal loop of my final night alive." "What do you want from me?" Raymond's voice cracked. "I want you to take me to Harrisburg. That's where I was going when I crashed. I was supposed to meet my sister there, tell her I was getting married, share the good news. I never made it. If you can take me there, maybe I can finally finish my journey. Maybe I can finally rest." Raymond drove on autopilot, his mind reeling. He wanted to believe this was an elaborate prank, but the empty mirror didn't lie. Emma had no reflection because she wasn't really there. Not in the way living things were there. "Where in Harrisburg?" Raymond asked. "The coffee shop on Market Street. Been there. That's where I was supposed to meet my sister." Raymond changed his route to go directly into Harrisburg, desperate to deliver his passenger and be done with this nightmare. They reached the city just before midnight. Raymond found Market Street and located the coffee shop Emma had mentioned. "Here we are," Raymond said. Emma looked at the darkened shop, closed for the night, and her shoulders slumped. "She's not here. My sister's not here. Of course not. It's been 7 years. She wouldn't still be waiting." "I'm sorry," Raymond said, and meant it despite his fear. "Do you know what the worst part is?" Emma asked, tears streaming down her pale face. "I've been picked up before. 7 times in 7 years, 7 different drivers have stopped for me. And every time I think maybe this will be the time I can finish my journey, deliver my news, find my peace. But my sister is never there. The shop is always closed, and I always end up back on that shoulder in the rain, waiting for another driver to pick me up. I'm trapped in this loop, Raymond. Endlessly repeating the same failed journey, never reaching my destination, never finding rest." Raymond felt a wave of pity overwhelm his fear. "What can I do to help you?" Emma turned to look at him, and her eyes were black voids, empty of anything human. "You can join me. You can stay with me on that shoulder waiting in the rain. Then I won't be alone anymore. That's what all the others did. The 7 drivers who picked me up before you. They're all standing on that shoulder now, waiting in the rain, trapped in my loop. You'll be the 8th. Raymond grabbed his door handle and threw himself out of the moving truck, hitting the pavement hard and rolling several times before coming to a stop. His truck continued forward driverless and crashed into a parked car 30 yards ahead. Raymond lay on the wet street, bruised and bleeding, watching as Emma emerged from his wrecked truck and walked back toward him. "You can't escape, Raymond. You stopped for me. You entered my loop. Now you're part of it forever." Raymond scrambled to his feet and ran, not knowing where he was going, just desperate to get away. He ran through Harrisburg's empty streets, Emma's footsteps echoing behind him no matter how fast he moved. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs collapsed, until he couldn't run anymore. When Raymond woke, he was standing on the shoulder of Route 15, rain pouring down on him. Cars passed without stopping. He tried to wave them down, but they ignored him. Hours passed, days maybe. Time had no meaning anymore. Then Emma appeared beside him, dry despite the rain. "Welcome to the loop, Raymond. We'll wait here together until someone stops. And when they do, we'll try again to reach Harrisburg. We'll try again to deliver my news. We'll try again and again and again, forever, always failing, always returning here. You're the 8th now. Maybe when we reach 13, the loop will break. Or maybe it never breaks. Maybe this is just what eternity looks like. Standing in the rain on a Pennsylvania highway, waiting for help that either doesn't come or leads only back to this same spot." Raymond tried to scream, but no sound came out. He looked at his hands and saw they were translucent, fading. He looked for his reflection in a puddle and saw nothing. He'd become like Emma, an echo, a memory, a ghost trapped in an endless loop of an unfinished journey. Sometimes late at night on Route 15 through Pennsylvania when it's raining, drivers report seeing multiple figures on the shoulder. 8 of them now, standing together, all with their thumbs out, all desperate for a ride. Most drivers pass without stopping, sensing something wrong. But occasionally someone stops, someone with compassion or curiosity or ignorance of the danger. And that person climbs into their truck with a passenger who has no reflection, who tells a story of an unfinished journey, who leads them inexorably toward Harrisburg and the moment when they'll join the others on that rainy shoulder, the 9th member of Emma's eternal loop. The hitchhiker with no reflection is still waiting, still recruiting, still trying to complete her impossible journey. And the collection of trapped souls grows slowly, one compassionate driver at a time, all of them learning too late that some kindnesses lead only to damnation, and some passengers never truly leave. Story 7. The Fog That Erased Everything. Daniel Morrison had been driving through fog before. It was an unavoidable part of trucking, especially in the Pacific Northwest, where he'd operated for most of his 22-year career. The 46-year-old driver from Oregon had learned to navigate thick fog banks with caution and patience. But on a March morning in 2021, Daniel entered a fog unlike any he'd experienced, a fog that didn't just obscure vision but erased reality itself, one piece at a time. Daniel was hauling timber from Eugene to Seattle, taking Highway 5 north through familiar territory. Around 5 a.m., just past the Oregon-Washington border, he entered a fog bank that appeared suddenly and completely. One moment he could see 100 yards ahead. The next moment he couldn't see beyond his hood ornament. The fog was impossibly thick, white, and luminous, almost glowing in his headlights. Daniel slowed to 40 miles per hour, turned on his hazard lights, and continued carefully. Fog like this usually lasted a few miles at most. But after driving for 20 minutes, the fog hadn't thinned. If anything, it had gotten thicker. Daniel could barely see the road beneath him, could only follow the white line visible a few feet ahead of his bumper. Then the road disappeared. Not physically, Daniel could still feel his truck driving on pavement, but visually. The white line vanished, the road surface became invisible, and Daniel was driving through pure whiteness, navigating by feel alone. He slowed to 20 miles per hour, terrified of driving off the road without being able to see it. The dashboard lights began to fade. One by one, his instruments went dark, speedometer, fuel gauge, temperature readouts. Within minutes, Daniel's entire dashboard was black, showing no information. His headlights dimmed to nothing. The fog had swallowed light itself. Daniel's phone showed no signal, no GPS, nothing. The screen went dark and wouldn't turn back on. His CB radio produced only silence, not static, but pure absence of sound. It was as if the fog was absorbing everything technological, erasing all the tools Daniel depended on. He stopped his truck, afraid to continue blind. But when he set the brake and turned off the engine, he discovered something worse. The silence wasn't from the fog absorbing sound. It was from the fog erasing it. He couldn't hear his own breathing, couldn't hear his heartbeat, couldn't hear anything at all. The fog had eliminated sound. Daniel climbed out of his cab and immediately lost his balance. He couldn't see the ground, couldn't judge distances. He grabbed his truck for support and felt its solid metal beneath his hands. At least touch still worked. He stood beside his truck, surrounded by luminous white fog, unable to see, hear, or navigate. Then his sense of touch began to fade. The truck beneath his hands felt less solid, more like mist. Daniel couldn't tell if he was still holding it or if his hands were passing through it. The boundary between his body and the world around him was dissolving. Panic set in. Daniel tried to scream, but he couldn't hear his own voice, couldn't even feel his throat vibrating. He was being erased by the fog, one sense at a time. Soon he wouldn't be able to feel his own body, and then what? Would he cease to exist entirely, absorbed into this white nothingness like everything else? Daniel concentrated on his remaining senses. He could still feel cold, could sense the fog against his skin like damp cloth. He could still smell, a metallic ozone-like scent that reminded him of electrical storms. And he could still taste, though there was nothing to taste except the vague mineral flavor of the fog itself. He forced himself to think rationally. Fog was water vapor. Water vapor was physical. Physical things had limits. This fog had to have boundaries, had to eventually end. He just needed to find his way through it. But which direction? Without sight or sound, without landmarks or instruments, Daniel had no way to navigate. He could walk in any direction and have no idea if he was moving towards safety or deeper into danger. He decided to follow his truck's trailer, hand over hand, until he reached the end of it. From there, he would continue in the same direction, away from his truck, reasoning that forward motion was better than staying in place. Daniel moved slowly, carefully, feeling his way along the trailer's side. When he reached the back of the trailer, Daniel paused. Once he let go, he would have no reference point, no anchor to reality. He would be completely adrift in the white void. But staying meant potential starvation, meant waiting for the fog to finish erasing him. Daniel let go and walked forward into the fog. He walked for what felt like hours. Though without sight or sound, he had no way to judge time. His feet told him he was still on pavement, still on the highway. He hadn't fallen into a ditch or walked off a cliff, so that was something. He kept moving, kept walking north, kept hoping to find the edge of this impossible fog. His sense of taste disappeared, then his sense of smell. Daniel was down to just touch and an increasingly vague sense of his own body existing in space. The fog was erasing him methodically, saving his core sense of self for last. Then, after an eternity of walking through white nothingness, Daniel felt something change. The air grew warmer. His sense of smell returned, car exhaust, coffee, diesel fuel. Sound came back in a rush. Traffic, voices, the rumble of trucks. Vision returned, blurry at first, but rapidly clearing. Daniel found himself standing in a truck stop parking lot, surrounded by normal fog, the thin morning mist common to this region. His truck was parked 50 yards behind him, exactly where he'd left it, though he'd walked what felt like miles. Other drivers were moving around, getting coffee, fueling up, completely normal. Daniel checked his phone. It was 5:17 a.m., only 17 minutes after he'd entered the thick fog. 17 minutes for what had felt like hours of sensory deprivation and existential terror. He walked back to his truck and found all his instruments working normally, his dashboard lights bright, his CB radio chattering with the usual trucker conversations. Had he hallucinated the entire experience? Had he fallen asleep briefly and dreamed it? But no, his truck was stopped on the highway when he woke up in the parking lot. He definitely experienced something real. Daniel completed his delivery to Seattle but couldn't stop thinking about the fog. He researched similar experiences and found scattered reports of drivers encountering the erasing fog, a phenomenon that appeared randomly along highways, primarily in the Pacific Northwest, that seemed to systematically remove sensory input from anyone caught in it. Most reports described the same progression: sight first, then sound, then touch, smell, and taste. A few reported losing their sense of self entirely, feeling their consciousness dissolve into the fog before suddenly finding themselves back in normal reality. No one knew what caused it. Some thought it was a natural phenomenon related to atmospheric conditions. Others believed it was a parallel dimension that occasionally intersected with our own. Still others thought it was a mass hallucination triggered by exhaustion and isolation. Daniel never drove that stretch of Highway 5 again without anxiety, watching for any sign of unusual fog. He saw it once more 3 years later, that luminous white thickness appearing suddenly in his path. This time, Daniel pulled over immediately and waited for it to pass. He watched other trucks drive into the fog and disappear, vanish completely as if they'd never existed. Some emerged from the other side seconds later. Others didn't emerge at all, leaving Daniel to wonder if they'd been completely erased, absorbed into the white void, their trucks and cargo and very existence removed from reality. The fog that erased everything is still out there, appearing randomly along highways where conditions are right or wrong. It looks like normal fog until you enter it, and by then it's too late to avoid the systematic erasure of your senses, the terrifying dissolution of your connection to reality. Most people emerge from it eventually, confused and disoriented but intact. But some don't emerge. Some drivers enter the fog and never come out, their trucks found abandoned or never found at all, as if the fog decided their erasure should be permanent. Daniel survived his encounter, but he knows he was lucky. Next time, if there is a next time, the fog might not give him back. It might erase him completely, removing him from existence so thoroughly that no one will remember he was ever there at all. The fog that erases everything doesn't discriminate, doesn't choose its victims based on any logic humans can understand. It simply appears, consumes, and sometimes, but not always, releases what it's consumed. And every driver in the Pacific Northwest knows that the next fog bank they enter might be the one that erases them forever, leaving nothing behind but an empty truck and the vague sense that someone used to be there, someone whose name and face and entire existence has been absorbed into the luminous white void that occasionally swallows pieces of our world and refuses to give them back. Story 8. The Delivery to Nowhere. Samuel Chen had been driving for transcontinental freight for 6 years when he received the strangest delivery order of his career. The 29-year-old driver from San Francisco was used to unusual requests: late-night pickups, remote drop-off locations, vague addresses that required investigation. But in September 2022, Samuel received instructions for a delivery that violated every logical principle of geography, time, and space. The load was standard, industrial equipment, nothing special. The pickup location in Bakersfield was unremarkable. But the delivery address made Samuel pause. Intersection of Route 46 and Route 46, coordinates 35.79 N 120 116 28 W, delivered to client on site, no signature required. Samuel entered the coordinates into his GPS. They pointed to a location in Central California, apparently on Route 46. but the address said intersection of Route 46 and Route 46, implying the highway intersected itself, which was geometrically impossible. Roads didn't cross themselves unless they formed a loop or interchange, and Route 46 did neither at those coordinates. Samuel called dispatch to clarify. "I think there's an error in the delivery address. It says Route 46 intersects with itself." The dispatcher checked his records. That's what the client specified. They were very clear, the intersection of Route 46 and Route 46 at those exact coordinates. Delivery at midnight tonight. Don't be late. The client only appears at midnight. Appears? What does that mean? How should I know? Just make the delivery, get confirmation, come back. You're being paid triple for this run. Don't overthink it. Triple pay was enough to silence Samuel's questions. He loaded the cargo and headed toward the coordinates, arriving around 11:30 p.m. The location was in the middle of nowhere. Empty plains, no buildings, no lights. Just Route 46 stretching in both directions under a clear moonlit sky. Samuel pulled over at the exact coordinates and checked his GPS. It confirmed he was at the specified location. But there was no intersection, no crossroads, just a straight stretch of two-lane highway. No client, no buildings, nothing. He waited. 11:45 p.m., 11:50 p.m., 11:55 p.m. At exactly midnight, the world shifted. Samuel felt it physically, a lurching sensation like the ground had dropped 6 inches and then returned. When his vision cleared, he was no longer on the same highway. The road ahead of him curved sharply to the left. The road behind him curved sharply to the right. And directly in front of his truck, the two curves met, forming an intersection where Route 46 crossed itself in a geometric impossibility. A figure stood at the intersection, illuminated by Samuel's headlights. A man in a dark suit, completely ordinary except for the fact that he cast no shadow despite the bright lights shining on him. Samuel grabbed his CB radio, but it was dead. His cell phone showed no signal. He was alone with this impossible intersection and its shadowless occupant. The man gestured toward Samuel's trailer, clearly expecting the delivery. Samuel climbed out of his cab, his legs shaking. He approached the man cautiously. "Are you the client? Are you here for the industrial equipment?" The man nodded but didn't speak. He pointed at the trailer, then at a spot on the ground at the center of the intersection, the point where Route 46 crossed itself, where two versions of the same road occupied the same space. "You want me to unload it here?" Samuel asked. "In the middle of the highway?" The man nodded again. Samuel wanted to refuse, wanted to demand answers, but something about this situation made him compliant. He unloaded the cargo, heavy machinery parts, crates of equipment, and placed them at the intersection point as instructed. The moment the last crate touched the ground, the man touched it with one finger. The cargo vanished instantly, not gradually disappearing, but simply ceasing to exist, as if it had been deleted from reality. The man then pulled out a device Samuel had never seen, something like a smartphone but with symbols instead of letters on its screen. The man tapped the device and Samuel's own phone buzzed. "Delivery confirmed" appeared on Samuel's screen along with a digital signature from Client 0. Intersection Authority, Timeline 7B. Before Samuel could process what he was reading, the world shifted again. That same lurching sensation. When it settled, Samuel was back on the straight stretch of Route 46. No intersection visible, no curve in the road, no shadowless man. Just empty highway under a clear sky, exactly as it had been before midnight. Samuel checked his GPS. Same coordinates. But now the area looked completely normal and his delivery records showed the job is complete. Signed off by Client 0. with a timestamp of 12:00 a.m. exactly. Samuel drove back to Bakersfield in a daze. He submitted his delivery report, collected his triple pay, and tried to forget about the experience. But he couldn't. The intersection of Route 46 and Route 46 haunted him. How had the road curved to cross itself? Where had the cargo gone? Who or what was Client 0 Point? He researched obsessively and found references to 0 point intersections, theoretical locations where different timelines or dimensions touched, creating geographic impossibilities that existed only at specific times. According to fringe physics theories, roads could intersect themselves if they existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with the intersection point serving as a transfer location for cargo moving between realities. Samuel found other drivers who'd made deliveries to impossible locations. One had delivered to a warehouse that only existed between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Another had dropped cargo at a dock on a lake that didn't exist on any map. A third had delivered to a rest stop that was simultaneously in Nevada and North Carolina, existing in both states at once through some spatial anomaly. All of them had been paid extremely well. All of them had been warned never to talk about their deliveries. And all of them had noticed that after making these impossible deliveries, their lives felt slightly wrong, as if they'd been shifted into a timeline that wasn't quite the one they'd left. Samuel began noticing discrepancies in his own life. His apartment number had changed from 304 to 314, though all his belongings were in the same place, and his lease showed 314 had always been his unit. His girlfriend's name was Jessica, but he had vague memories of her being named Jennifer. His truck was blue, but he distinctly remembered purchasing a red truck 6 years ago. The delivery to nowhere had shifted Samuel into a slightly different version of reality, a timeline where small details were altered. Most people wouldn't notice, but Samuel had been to the intersection point, had stood at the exact location where timelines touched. He'd been exposed to the boundaries between realities, and now he could perceive the inconsistencies. He received more delivery orders to impossible locations over the following months. Each time he completed one, more discrepancies appeared in his life. His mother's maiden name changed. The city where he'd gone to high school shifted 300 miles west. His first pet had been a dog instead of a cat. Reality was rewriting itself around Samuel, one delivery at a time. Samuel realized he was being used as a courier between dimensions, delivering cargo from one timeline to another. Each delivery required him to pass through the intersection points, the 0 point locations where multiple realities touched. And each passage shifted him slightly, moved him incrementally from his original timeline into adjacent ones. He tried to refuse future deliveries, but the orders kept coming, marked as mandatory by his company. Samuel discovered that Transcontinental Freight was owned by a parent corporation with no physical address, no CEO, no board of directors, just a logo and a name. He was working for an interdimensional shipping company serving clients that existed outside normal reality, delivering cargo to locations that shouldn't exist. Samuel quit and tried to start a new life, but the deliveries found him anyway. Orders appeared on his phone from companies he'd never worked for, instructions to pick up cargo from one impossible location and deliver it to another. He could ignore them, but the pay was always substantial, and his financial situation always seemed to deteriorate until he had no choice but to accept. Samuel Chen is still driving, still making deliveries to nowhere, still passing through intersection points where roads cross themselves and buildings exist only at specific times. With each delivery, he shifts further from his original timeline, further from the reality where he was born. He barely remembers his original life anymore. The details have been overwritten by too many shifts, too many passages through 0 point intersections. One day, Samuel knows he'll make a delivery and won't be able to return at all. He'll be too far from his origin point, too many timelines removed from where he started. He'll be trapped in some alternate reality where everyone he knew has different names, where history followed different paths. where he's a stranger in a world that's almost but not quite the one he was born into. The delivery to nowhere never truly ends. Each impossible address leads to another. Each intersection point leads to further shifts. Each cargo delivered to shadowless clients moves Samuel one step further from home and one step closer to being lost forever in the infinite maze of adjacent timelines, where roads cross themselves, where midnight brings geometric impossibilities, and where drivers who ask too few questions become permanent couriers for the spaces between realities, forever delivering cargo to locations that exist everywhere and nowhere, serving clients that have no shadows because they cast their presence across too many dimensions to be confined by simple light and darkness.